TD Bank it was last year, got hit with a $3 billion fine for anti-money laundering challenges. So they're always getting in trouble with the regulator. So having a good relationship with the regulator is important, and it really speaks to clarity on what your regulations are and how that maps to your process.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And this is the segment where we bring some very special guests from the industry. And for today, we have Michael. Michael, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Michael Schenk. So I'm author of the book, Digital Transformation Success. I've been a consultant for most of my career. So I've worked with a lot of large organizations, specifically in banking, on how they could leverage business process to really solve a whole host of challenges and transform.
Okay, amazing. So I would love to peel layers into that. I mean, that's the beauty of this show. We go very deep and in detail, and hopefully our audience can have some takeaways from that. I would like to speak to my audience just for a second, and then I'll come back to you, Michael. Okay. So if you are in the audience, we are a big fan of this three-way conversation. So make sure you guys post your questions, comments, stories, anything that you might be able to relate with. We would love to review them as well as discuss them. So, Michael, for the most part, when we look at our audience as well as the show, we are concentrated towards, I would say, manufacturing, distribution, retail, which is different than something like banking. Mm-hmm. Banking is very, very, very different. And in fact, I mean, I like to call this as more of the non-ERP industry. Yeah. We are enterprise software, but we talk a lot about ERP as well. So I don't think we have had a lot of episodes around banking. So maybe, I mean, from your experience, I don't know if you have seen any other industries as well. Maybe talk about the differences in banking and differences in the implementation, the large implementation that you are talking about from the perspective of banking.
Yeah, let me just start. I think in general, business process is the key. I think it's regardless of industry. So it's all about understanding, especially when you're taking a large transformation or implementing software like an ERP, is to really understand what it is your business does so that you're implementing the solutions that fit what your business needs as opposed to implementing technology. So banking is unlike, say, manufacturing. You mentioned it's not a physically tangible because people could be located anywhere within the world and in different locations, et cetera. And it's a heavily regulated, and so obviously I think there's like 5 or 6 regulators in the U.S. and across the world there's plenty of them. So it's really obviously it's all about managing money, making money available via loans, et cetera. And then banks really have to have an eye towards who their customers are and delivering great experiences to them because they could ultimately vote with their feet and go to somebody else that's going to give them a better experience. But the heavily regulated part, it's really about understanding. You need to understand what your processes are and what regulatory obligations you have on those. Yeah. So that's why it's really important to have a detailed understanding of your process.
Okay, so I mean, this is great. And business processes, when people think about that, it could mean a lot of different things, right? Yep. So maybe touch a little bit on which business processes are we talking about? Is it sales? Is it operations? Is it finance? In banking, you are going to have compliance as well. You mentioned regulations. So which specific business process are we talking about here?
I'd say it's all the above. And specifically, if you're going through a large transformation like a digital transformation, or if you're looking for efficiencies and trying to get to operational excellence, then you really want to look at your organization and understand what is the pain point? Where do you want to improve in? And then map out those processes. So as I mentioned, it's industry agnostic and it's really agnostic of any type of functional area. So my approach with this, and I think it's somewhat unique and probably is a break from conventional process management, thoughts is to capture every single process your organization does.
Yeah.
And to be complete and comprehensive, I think you need to talk to people. You can't just rely on reference frameworks because each organization is unique and has its own nuances. So in my approach, I start with the top of the organization and conduct an interview process. So let's say I go to head of finance or head of sales, but I ask them about their organization, how it breaks down. And then I interview those next set of leaders and I keep walking down the organizational hierarchy, just asking a simple question. What is it that you, when I get the answers, I translate that into verb, noun, process names. And then I go back up the hierarchy to have everyone sign off on that this is accurate. Now this is a solid foundation for doing everything information.
Okay, so very interesting. So I'm going to mention some of the personal stories, and I have done some business in banking as well, to be completely honest. So I know how that works inside banking, financial services, investment banking, etc. When I look at banking, and theoretically, whatever you are talking about, that's great. That, okay, I'm going to start from top. I'm going to talk to everybody. But, I'm looking at this from both perspectives. Number one, I as the customer of banks, and then I as the sort of the implementation guy for the bank, right?
Yep.
When I go to a bank, and banks are very different in general, the way they operate, they work, right? And I like to relate with them as sort of the retail organizations. Okay, even though you are going to, a lot of people are going to argue that, when you look at retail, it's all about customer experience because you are dealing with consumers. You need to really invest in customer experience.
Yep.
But if you look at their business, okay, they tend to be very franchise centric. And when I say franchise centric, meaning each branch has their own country, I guess. They don't talk to anybody else. So you start from top. In fact, I mean, if you look at the core operations, the way they operate, they don't even talk to call center. There is no communication whatsoever. Okay, so let's say if you are going to start from the top, the bottom is completely disconnected. So how do you streamline? And again, I don't think that is changing anytime soon. I have, struggled with a lot of issues personally when I was talking to them, and they're like, we don't talk to them. Okay, not happening.
Yeah. Well, there are some areas where they do have to connect. Obviously, there's common data as you open a banking account, regardless of whatever type of account. It could be a mortgage account, a credit card account, a savings account, checking account, whatever. That bank has to know who you are because there's a lot of regulations on knowing your customer, anti-money laundering, just making sure that you're not on a prohibited list or whatnot.
Yeah.
So it's important that they tie that data together, regardless of how you come. And then there's a big multi-channel aspect of it as well. So obviously, you could walk into a branch and do some transaction with the teller. You could do it online. You could do it mobile, et cetera. So all of that has to work seamlessly across different departments. How do you integrate them together? I think you need to, one, map out your processes and make it transparent to everyone what others do so that they can collaborate more effectively. But you bring up customer experience, and a lot of organizations are standing up dedicated customer experience groups, and they're doing a couple things. Obviously, building personas so they could understand more of the motivations behind who their customers are and why they bank with them and what experiences they're looking for, et cetera. But then there's the customer journey. So from a outside in perspective, what's that life cycle of how a customer interacts with them? But you could connect that to your process because different stages of that interaction connects with different processes in each organizational unit. So if you understand that connection, you analyze your customers and you could identify where there's pain points or opportunities. Now you could connect the dots all the way from that customer's experience down to the individual process. And if you take it even a step further, if I have a list of processes, I could associate those processes, different data in my organization for how I operate, such as what systems are there, what risks and controls are there, what third-party vendors, et cetera. So I've really connected all the dots. And through that lens, now I can enable operational efficiencies to really define the right solution.
Okay, so very interesting. So let's peel some more layers, and I'm going to give you, some more macro perspective here, and we can debate. So See, when you look at the banking industry, I don't know how many banks are there, maybe 100. Again, the sample size is very small, right?
Mhm.
And they are sort of controlling the whole business. There might be national banks and then regional banks, but you can probably count them on your fingers
Yep.
in terms of how many are there. Now let's talk about their processes, right? You mentioned that you need to have checking account. Sure, the data needs to be shared with the backend team, but a checking account is checking account.
Mhm.
The processes are very similar. They are not. I don't think they are changing every day, right?
Yep.
So overall, from the process perspective, if there are not many variations, and from the customer experience fragmentation perspective, these people are not necessarily willing to cooperate. So where are the opportunities? Maybe talk about some of the engagements that you have done yourself. Where were the problem points that you found with these processes? That they did not think of, and then they had to probably resolve them.
Yeah, so a lot of these banks are very big and bureaucratic.
Yeah,
So it's not just your core processes like accessing money and
yeah,
transferring funds or that type of stuff. But there's a lot that goes in the background of how they operate, how they look for efficiencies, how they manage risk and compliance, the technology. I mean, these are especially, and you talk about number of banks. There's really four mega banks:
yeah,
the Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, and
yeah,
Citi are the big boys, and I've worked with all of them at some point in my career. So really getting all those teams to work together becomes a large challenge to push out change fast and to be efficient in how they serve their customers. There's a lot of legacy technology that's still leveraged there. There's the problem of multi-channel. So I
yeah,
should be able to start a transaction maybe on my phone and go into a branch and finish it. So making sure that that data is transferable no matter what channel that's in. And then risk and compliance. I know I've said it a couple times, but I've never really walked into a bank that didn't have one of their top 5 priorities as being more effective at managing.
yeah,
And I scan the headlines all the time, and I constantly see consent orders or fines or even worse. TD Bank it was last year got hit with a $3 billion fine for anti-money laundering
yeah.
challenges. So they're always getting in trouble with the regulator. So having a good relationship with the regulator is important, and it really speaks to clarity on what your regulations are and how that maps to your process.
Yeah, so very interesting. So I'm going to add some more colors here, and then you can provide your commentary in terms of what you are seeing in
Yeah.
the. So when we look at the bank, I mean, let's say you mentioned four banks, right? Their IT spend, as far as my understanding goes, is probably going to be $30 billion, maybe more.
Yeah.
For most national banks, for regional banks, it's going to be slightly lower, but they
Yeah.
have substantial investment as well, right? When you look at the overall state of the industry,
Hmm.
we have had a lot more commercial, software coming in. We have platforms such as ServiceNow. I don't know which platforms you have utilized, where you have consulted,
Yeah.
but companies are not necessarily doing as much custom development as they used to.
Yeah.
10 years back, they would probably have a million applications sitting inside bank that nobody knows what they are doing
Yeah.
and what's happening inside those applications. So there was a big IT footprint. I mean, in my mind, when I look at the revenue comparison between companies like SAP, Oracle, and a bank, SAP, if you look at their ERP revenue, that's probably going to be $30 billion.
Hmm.
So technically, bank is an IT shop.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, when you look at all of these macro variables and when you compare, different applications, so maybe talk about the changes that you are seeing, because they are investing so much money. I don't know why they are investing that much money in
Yeah.
managing these applications. I don't know if the processes are really so different, or is it just chaos?
Oh, well, it's just chaos. But in terms of the platforms, I'll just list a bunch out. Obviously, they're going towards, especially for smaller banks,
Yeah,
the standard platforms. But there's your core banking platforms like
yeah,
FIS, Fiserv. There's your lending platforms like Encino. Obviously, your ERP systems for finance, HR like SAP, Oracle. ServiceNow for all
yeah,
your IT service management. So those are all there, and they leverage those. But it's really The struggle is just managing the amount of people that it takes a bank and getting that to run smoothly and breaking down those silos and being clear about what is it you do and where are we going to invest our dollars as we change.
Yeah, so very interesting. So, do you have any sort of stories that you might be able to share of the work that you have done? Maybe go a little deeper into that. And I don't know if you're able to share. You don't have to name the names, but at
Yeah.
least describe the work that you have done. What were the core challenges, and what you have done, I guess.
Yeah, one recent one. So I was at a very large bank that had a consent order. So they spent a lot of money, and I won't quote it, but doing a controls transformation. So
Yeah.
they had timelines. They had to meet with the regulators. They had specific goals regulators laid out for them for strengthening their controls, strengthening the risk data, et cetera. And the big issue for them was their risk data. So ultimately, if you think about risk and compliance, there's standard platforms called GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, which has all your risk data in it. And at the core of that is a data model, which is, ultimately risk management is an ISO 31000 defines risk as the uncertainty of achieving objectives. Well, how do you achieve objectives? That's through doing something or i.e. process. So at the core of the data structure is, what are my processes? What are the risks of those processes? And what are the controls? And the risk could come from regulatory out. And one of the core challenges on that is they use a process taxonomy that's typically in that data structure. So, but the challenge is my mortgage processes are much different than my retail processes, which are different than my credit card process. So when the teams are on the ground or doing risk assessments or regulatory mapping, they look at this taxonomy and they're like, this isn't exactly what we do. So they make a lot of assumptions and interpretations when they map the data. That gives them a lot of data quality issues when they look at that. And that creates a lot of confusion in the operating environment because there's a lot of different people that are involved in the frontline business to the risk oversight teams to the internal auditors, et cetera. So one of the projects I worked on was cleaning up that taxonomy and doing a process inventory set of interviews and collecting every process so that they could take their existing set of risks and controls, map it to what each business does uniquely, and then use that to clean up their data, get better reports to understand where there's gaps in controls, where there's maybe regulations that they're not as strong on. So that's one of them. I've also been involved in, and this is more insurance, but there was a large global insurance company that spun off their U.S. retail business because they didn't feel like that fit their long-term business vision. And this company made a few core decisions. One, they wanted to be a low-cost insurance provider. They didn't want to build or host any of their software, and they didn't want to inherit any of the old parent software. So it was essentially creating a new business with billions in assets, but creating a new business and starting everything from scratch. So we took a business process based lens to it, where we created this inventory at the 30,000 foot view level, did some strategy sessions around what they needed to implement, what the strategic direction for each of those business areas would be in terms of, is it best in class or best in cost? Best in class is, it's customer facing. We really want to differentiate. Best in cost is we just need to be good enough. But we carried that all the way through. And one of the big projects they did was an ERP implement. And we carried that through and detailed out all their business processes and used that for requirements, design, testing, ultimately user introduction with job aids, training, procedure documents, all aligned to the process of text.
Yeah, so very interesting. So process, taxonomy, and now I guess when you look at, and I don't know if you are familiar with tools such as your Solanas, even with AI, I think you are going to get a lot more visibility into process. So when you look at the landscape of the process transformation, in your view, let's say after 5 years, 10 years, do you think that this work is going to have some sort of relevance, or is it going to change, from the process perspective when you combine the AI's capabilities? Because they can do similar things as what you are doing, I guess. Solanas can do, and I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but it can do a lot more mining, but I don't know if in your experience that is good enough out of the box, or do you need to do more?
So I'm actually not familiar with Solanas specifically, but But where I think this is going is, and I read this report from Deloitte, State of AI, and they asked people, where do you want to see AI enable your organization forward? And a plurality of the respondents was embed AI deeply in my process.
Yeah.
And I don't think you could do that unless you know what your processes are.
Yeah.
And ultimately AI is a data problem. And one of the problems in the banks and any large organizations, they don't have good organized data of how they operate. So they'll have different names for the same thing.
Yeah.
Documents are poor quality, et cetera. So where I think this is going is, and you're probably familiar with the term digital twin, which is obviously big in manufacturing.
Yeah.
So digital twin is, I believe it's big in manufacturing because things are fixed. So you need to create a model of your environment so that you could kind of educate AI, leverage it to bring in data signals and analytics and a bunch of other things on that. But for an organization like a bank, which isn't physically tangible, I've not really seen anyone tackle that. And that's where I think process inventory really becomes more important and becomes the foundation. Because if you could inventory every process within your environment, if you could map all your operational data like systems, third parties, et cetera, create this entire model and then give it to a digital twin, now I can have a really end-to-end understanding of everything my business does. I could do predictive analytics, I could do data-driven decision making, I could do simulations, real-time monitoring, et cetera. So I think process actually becomes more important in this world, and that becomes your common language for AI to understand how things work. But I think if you take it even a step further, is where I think this is going is now, the hot topic is AI.
Yeah.
So and I was talking to someone that works at an automation firm, and he believes that RPA, for instance, will ultimately be displaced by AI agents, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Because RPA, it can be brittle, especially if there's changes to the system.
Yeah.
But if you have an understanding of your business and your processes and all the data aligned to one common structure, now those agents have an understanding of the world. And I could see scenarios where you speak into a phone and you say, I need to add some functionality to my site, and that agent will go look into your repository of processes, all the data, understand the impacts, go into your source code repository, create the code, put it in the CI/CD pipeline, test it, and then now I've taken an application change from months down to days or weeks. So really driving the agility and being able to push out change much faster. But there's a whole bunch of other scenarios: automated risk assessments, doing planning for large programs, estimating resource costs, et cetera. I think really the sky's the limit. But I do think that having that detailed understanding of your process.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you that, understanding of the processes is going to be far more important than doing the real work. But in my mind, when I look at AI, it's almost like dog eat dog situation, right? AI obviously can do whatever you have described, create the code, execute on the actions, etc. But what AI can also do is it can basically mine your process. And that's where I guess, so tools like Solonis, and that's not AI. It just process mining. But then when you combine the AI's capabilities, even today, when you talk to any generative AI sort of technologies, right? They can do a pretty good job in data mining and researching, crawling web. Right now, they are doing that as well, and producing very concise information that you are going to need. And my assumption is going to be that we are going to have technologies that are going to be able to mine whatever you are doing at this point of time, creating the process inventory. Because if AI can crawl the web, it can probably crawl the intranet as well and create all of what you are looking for. And then after that, execute on that as well. So do you see that happening? Do you not see that happening?
I do. And when I create a process inventory, I always like to do my homework. So get as much material I can so I could create a starting point. I never want to walk into an interview with the business with a blank sheet of paper. So but I still think you need humans in the loop on that. So, if AI can crawl all this document, give me a starting point, but I do fear that it's not going to be complete and may not necessarily be accurate. So I do need to talk to people and fill in those gaps. And then ultimately at the end of the day, if I'm going to ask somebody to be a process owner, I should have a conversation with them so that they could weigh in on what those processes are. You brought up another point. I'm sorry. Oh, process mining. I just wanted to say something about that. Process mining is great. Obviously, it gives you insights into, for what log files say is happening, or if it's task mining, what users are doing.
Yeah.
But it's really a question of scale. So, if I were to say take one of these large banks, I'd have to do process mining on hundreds of applications. And then when I
Yeah.
get that data back, how do I rationalize all that data in there? And that's where process inventory comes in, because I need that semantic structure to say that this data is really related to this process, this data is related to that process, so that I could take it from I'm not just mining, say, wire transactions, but I'm actually looking at the entire retail bank and understanding where there's gaps and efficiencies, opportunities, really at scale.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the overarching financial structure now with the geopolitical issues, and I
Yeah,
don't know if you are going to have any sort of insights into that. Obviously they are talking about probably parallel banking system. I don't know where that's going to go, but there are definitely talks around that, right? So the traditional banking system that has existed for, I don't know, maybe last 60 years,
yeah.
and we have survived that, right? So, do you think that is happening right now? Is it getting any sort of traction based on the geopolitical issues that are happening in the U.S. right now? Is that getting anywhere at all?
In terms of changes in the banking landscape.
Yeah. So overall, the way banking communication works right now, my understanding is that you have these global organizations that are sort of regulating, controlling things. You have said, so again, you have to have infrastructure for that, but if you change the rules of the games, then that is going to change pretty much everything, including your internal processes as well. So is that changing? Are people worried about that? What do you think?
Yes and no. I mean, I think the core infrastructure of banking is all through the SWIFT network.
Yeah.
So I don't see that kind of underlying infrastructure changing. I do think, and Trump and his team have announced they want to change the regulatory environment. As I
Yeah.
mentioned, there's and I can't list them, but there's like 5 or so regulators. There's the OCC, there's the Fed, there's
Yeah.
FFIEC, et cetera. It doesn't make sense to have multiple regulators looking at the same industry. And I think one of the things that he's going to look at doing is taking away the Fed's responsibility for regulation, and just make them responsible for managing our money supply and interest rates, and really keep focused on that agenda. I do think some regulations will go away. But some will have to stay the same. I mean, anti-money laundering, know your customer, like those aren't going away. But some regulations will go away, and that could be a good thing. And just one other thing about the banking industry too is I think regulations are actually protect some of the larger banks,
Yeah.
because it's so expensive and so onerous to keep up with it, that
Yeah.
it really keeps the next tier of banks kind of in that next tier, because they can't afford to go to that next. So hopefully you see some more competition across banks, and we're not just dominated kind of by the big four or the large banking.
Yeah. So what is happening with the newer banks? Obviously, you have the newer breed of banks, and they don't go by rules, and they probably have the identity crisis right now. Nobody recognizes them, but they are able to process very similar transactions, just like larger banks.
Hmm.
So, do you think that they are probably going to replace, or they are going to have better identity? I guess in the next few years, where do you see them playing in the overarching equation?
Uh, the, so I think banking still needs to have more of that competition, have more banks out there that
Yeah.
disperse the risk, et cetera. One other thing I think will happen, I don't know the timeline for that, but more kind of Bitcoin and
Yeah.
crypto banking. I have a friend who was a CIO of a crypto bank, and it got shut down by the.
Yeah.
But I think there's probably going to grow an acceptance in terms of different forms of what money is, and I think that'd be great.
Yeah, so very interesting. So I don't know if you're going to have any other thoughts that you wanted to share, that you plan to share on this show.
No, I mean, I know we talked a lot about banking, but I do think that my framework is really truly industry agnostic. In fact,
Yeah.
just to take one example of SAP purchased Signavio, because
Yeah.
they do realize that understanding your business processes are important for implementing and monitoring their software.
Yeah.
So really if you have this understanding of your processes, it really tackles everything that you need to do to run your business and to transform, such
Yeah.
as defining my strategy, understanding kind of where the strengths and weaknesses of what you do, where there's opportunities and threats from the external environment, so that you're investing your money appropriately in change. Everything from a transformation, defining that strategy, managing the journey, creating your roadmap, everything in the change process. So, and that's again, SAP and Signavio have done this really well of aligning your requirements, your design, your test script, your organizational change to the processes that's being implemented. Everything from operational excellence. So not just looking at where can I, from a Lean Six Sigma, where can I improve specific processes, but looking at the organization from a 30,000 foot view level and say, where do I have redundancy and efficiencies, maybe redundant technology that was purchased and evolved over time without kind of the right lens of efficiency, and then risk management. So and IT architecture, enterprise architecture is understanding. I think a lot of enterprise architects lack a real deep understanding of what this does.
Yeah.
And if you give them that lens, I think they could be more proactive in designing their IT strategy and governing what technologies.
Yeah, so very interesting. So maybe talk about your framework a little bit more as well. And I'm glad that you are bringing Signavio. And as such, when you look at Signavio, they are sort of combining the process mining layer with that. Similar tools have existed in the past. It's not that Signavio is completely new, but they have combined the process mining together. So now you don't have to do as much heavy lifting that you would have to do, with some of the tools, which was that the rational tool from IBM that was used very commonly. Right? And then you had several other process designing, as well as the enterprise architecture term that you had mentioned. Eris is one of them, that complete. So again, I think here with Signavio, number one, you have the SAP data that you are combining, and it sort of is integrated with the core infrastructure. I think that's where the real beauty is of SAP Signavio. As such, the concept was always there. So now when you look at your framework, my assumption would be that your framework would be unique because banking has very different data. It has nothing to do with the real world, right? When you talk about the traditional commerce data, traditional finance data, right? So talk about your framework a little bit. Where is it unique overall compared to what we already have, I guess, in the market?
So, and I'm glad you brought up the tools, Signavio, Eris, GB Tech BIC. The good thing is that the platforms for doing this is really a mature market, and they've got a lot of really good capability. And it combines modeling, it combines your data integration. So bringing in all your operational data, creating libraries, and then associating it with the right process. Process mining you mentioned, and then a lot of them integrate things like GRC, enterprise architecture, modeling, whatnot. Where my framework differs from conventional thinking is there's a heavy reliance on revenue. You probably look at, what does your standard manufacturing business do, or what does your standard bank do? You name your industry. And there's a lot of focus, if you read a lot of literature, is, you need to focus on your core process. But what my framework does is it really takes the understanding that you need to understand whatever. So be complete in that, and your business is going to look different because you've got nuances and idiosyncrasies in there that looks different than a reference framework. So you could use those as a starting point just to make sure you're being complete. But you really have to detail out everything your business does, so that you could, if there's a change, you could be very specific of what processes are changing, so that I could very prescriptive around who's the process owner involved, who's the technology, et cetera. So my framework is just capture every single process through a very rigorous methodology, align all the data so that you could create a comprehensive store of operating information in one database.
Yeah, so very interesting. So maybe talk about the goal of your framework, what you are trying to do with that. Is your goal to create some sort of industry standardization? Is it primarily for you to be able to sell your services? Or is it, are you trying to create some sort of tool, or you want other tool publishers to adopt your framework?
So I'm actually partners with a lot of the tools that I mentioned, and I do some brand advocacy, and because I think many of the tools, their sales model is, here's the features and functions. You can create this diagram, you can create this taxonomy, et cetera, but no one's selling the larger for what it can. And I think a lot of organizations buy these tools, but don't really know, don't have that vision. So I think their investment is typically underutilized. Ultimately, I want it to become the industry standard for process management across all industries. So and as I mentioned, it's bespoke to each business. So it's really adopting the mindset of this is how you need to do it. I need to build a process center of excellence. And ultimately, the end goal for them is, and I always talk about this is a ubiquitous stat, but 70% of transformation. And the implication to that is budget, timeline, missed functionalities from a stakeholder perspective. But it's also operational efficiency. Is my cost profile? What's my how fast can I push out change, et cetera. So, if organizations adopt this, I think it's going to be a game changer for how they operate and their competitive positioning. But also now, and we've already talked about AI, but once you leverage this as a platform to integrate AI into your processes, I think it's really going to change the game in terms of how these businesses operate.
It is definitely going to change the game. On that note, I think we are close to our time right now. So I don't know if you are going to have any sort of closing thoughts, advice for our listeners.
So first off, Sam, thanks for the time. I think this is a great and full discussion. Just if anyone likes the concepts that I talked about here, my book is Digital Transformation Success. You can find it on Amazon or find me on LinkedIn. I post fairly regularly about these concepts, and I'm always open to a discussion if anyone.
Okay, amazing. So thank you so much for your time once again, Michael. This has been a fascinating episode, and good luck with championing your book as well as the framework.
Thank you, Sam. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So this is the end of the episode. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our Impl series, for which we meet every Friday, anywhere from 8 to 11 a.m. Eastern. So look out for the future episodes. We are going to come back with many more guests. We don't meet every Friday, but some Fridays we will meet. On that note, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.